third and final session of day one of IJNR's workshop on traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous knowledge. We've had a couple of great sessions, and I'm excited for this next one because we're kind of turning from our bigger picture discussion of infrastructure and bureaucracy to on-the-ground projects and things going on with specific tribes as they use indigenous knowledge to not only take back some tribal sovereignty over their lands, but also work on things like food security and climate resilience and projects like that. And we, for those of you who just joined, we unfortunately have lost a speaker. Melissa Nelson is not going to be able to join us. She has COVID and does not feel like interacting via Zoom, which I totally understand. I'm going to still get you her contact info. She encouraged me to reach out to all of you and let you know that, encouraged all of you to reach out to her. So we will get that to you and let you know what her area of expertise is on this front. But for those who are joining us, we have Ashley Russell, and Ashley is a Molucc, Coos, and Pamunkey descendant and an enrolled citizen of the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, or an acronym again, the CTC-LUSI. It has been a day rich in acronyms. So with the CTC-LUSI, Ashley works for the tribe as the Assistant Director of the Culture and Natural Resources Department, where she coordinates and supports the development and implementation of all aspects of cultural knowledge transfer, including but not limited to planning cultural awareness and outreach programs and events to educate CTC-LUSI citizens and the surrounding community about their culture. She also partners with other indigenous nations and federal, state, and local agencies, stakeholders, and private landowners to support the co-management of CTC-LUSI resources within the tribe's ancestral territory and the continued expression and continuity of her tribe's culture and stewardship practices. When she's not doing that big job, Ashley is also currently pursuing a Master's of Natural Resources at Oregon State University's eCampus through the College of Forestry. And she's a faculty research assistant in the Forest Ecosystems and Society Department. Ashley is recognized for her knowledge of her tribe's culturally significant species, including first foods, weaving materials, as well as her art and singing, and especially enjoys working with youth and fostering their reconnection to the lands of their ancestors, their cultural identity, and their heritage. So Ashley, we're thrilled to have you with us. And Latrice, I don't know if she has found service yet, but she will be logging in when she does. Latrice Tatsy is a soil scientist, cultural science lead, and intern supervisor for the Pequaney Lodge Health Institute of the Blackfeet Nation. Latrice has worked with the Institute's Regenerative Grazing Initiative for 2 years and recently completed her master's at Montana State University and the Department of Land Resources and Environmental Science. Her research focuses on ways cattle and bison influence soil health, and she's working with local beef cattle producers and the Blackfeet Nation tribal bison herd. Latrice was raised on her family's ranch on Badger Creek in Blackfeet Nation, and her family raises beef cattle. She relies on the knowledge taught by her father, uncles, and grandmother about the traditional and historical uses of their land. So that is who we have speaking to us today, and that was me saying way too many words. And I think Latrice's phone just entered the conversation, so we'll see if we can get her queued up. And Ashley, you should be I'll make you a co-host so that you can share your screen. And we're going to go with you first, I believe. And Latrice, did she successfully make it? We'll keep working with her. But Ashley, why don't you go ahead?
Gala, thanks, Adam. Dai Chilsla, Gala Gahais, Gala Chil Hamakami, Dakshi Chil Lue, Ashley Russell Sinsenu, Milik Ka'au, Lukwaya, Tlana Manayats, Tla Kukwis. Hello, everyone. Good sky or good day. It's good to see everyone here. How's everyone's heart? Ashley Russell, I'm called. Like Adam said, I'm a Milik and Pamunkey person, and my family lives in Coos Bay, Oregon, from which my ancestors have lived for thousands of years or since time immemorial. I've been asked to speak with you guys today about some of the stuff that my tribe's doing. So let me try to not there. Can you guys see a slideshow presentation?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. Um, I'm not sure what you guys can see on your end, but I apologize if there's a bunch of windows open on the left side of my screen. Um, so you guys already heard Adam introduce myself, so I won't bore you too much with that. But I also into 2021 I completed an herbal immersion program, which taught me a lot about traditional medicine and inspired me to research my own tribe's medicine, because there's been a lot of knowledge lost, and we've been divorced from our culture for a very long time, which I'll get into that now. You guys already saw that. Oh, before assistant director, I was the water protection specialist for my tribe, and I monitor water quality currently. So I wear lots of hats. And I'm also interested in, if you guys care to know, botany, so plants, of course, foraging, food preservation, weaving, singing, like Adam said, beading, reading, and I love chickens. They're like just the cutest little creatures. So again, I'm a Milik Coos person. I'm enrolled with the Confederated Tribes of the Coos Loram Kwansayusla Indians. We are based in Southern Oregon on the Southern Oregon coast. Our ancestral territory once stretched 1.6 million acres, and our tribe is composed of 4 bands. So we have Shayushla or Sayusla in the north, and then south of them is the Queech or the Lower Umpqua peoples. And then just south of them is the Honas and Milik Coos people. Our current enrollment numbers are only 1,300, but pre-colonization and pre-disease, we numbered in the thousands. So I'm going to talk about the first. We have 3 rivers within our ancestral territory, and one of them is called Iktatu, and that's the one in the north. It's known as the big one in Shayushla and Queech. And Sayusla is the name. So Shayushla is the name of the people, and so that's what the river, the anglicized version of the river was named, was Sayusla River. So it's actually called Iktatu. To get more confusing, the river south of that in Queech territory is also called Iktatu, because Shayushla and Queech peoples speak the same language, just different dialects. So depending on which one you're talking about can get really confusing. And then the third river is Kukwis Shishti, or Coos River, or Shishtime Coos Bay. And that's where my people are from. And the Milik and Honas people live here. So we have North Bend and Coos Bay, and you can't really tell which city, where one city ends and one begins. And so the Honas people lived on North Bay, or North Bend rather, and the Milik people lived in Coos Bay proper and just south on South Slough. So we like to talk about how Earth, or Tladayas, provides the culture, and the culture stewards Tladayas, or the place. It's to find us for who we are, for who we've been for millennia, and it's where almost everybody's culture derives from. It's that relationship to the land over, thousands of years. It influences our language, our songs, our practices, our identity as not just Indigenous peoples, but as people in general. And we develop traditions, stories, and ceremonies associated with what we were provided from these lands. Here's pictured a painting painted by a tribal member, Pam Stolzler, who's the Queech tribal member, of one of our origin stories, the story of two arrow young men who came down to Earth and saw that it was a watery planet and started breaking up their baskets and putting them on the land to hold the water back and putting down blue clay and planting eagle feathers to turn into trees. And it's a really beautiful story. That's a very shortened version of that. I'm not a storyteller. That's not one of my strengths. But if you ever get the chance to look up Two Arrow Young Men in Coos text by Leo Frachtenberg, I believe it's in there. You can find the story of Two Arrow Young Men. And so, today's conference is about TEK. I'm sure you guys have probably heard a lot about TEK by now. But I'd just like to go over a few definitions of how it's evolved. And so scientific knowledge is the systemic enterprise that gathers and condenses knowledge into testable laws and principles. And then there's traditional knowledge, which everyone has. It's long-standing knowledge, practice, and belief developed from experience gained over centuries and adapted to the local culture and environment, handed down through the generations. And so if you belong to a family that's, lived in one place for a couple generations, you have traditional knowledge. And then traditional ecological knowledge just relates to the relationship of living beings, including humans, with one another and with their environment. And here's a picture of me attempting to kiss a lamprey. I don't recommend it. And this next slide is the new term that we're using is Indigenous knowledge. It's knowledge created or normalized by Indigenous peoples that may include traditional knowledge and scientific knowledge. And here pictured, we have our chief who, apologize, I'm probably going to get choked up right now. I can't say his name because he's recently made his journey as of November 4th. So in our tradition, we can't speak people's name while they're making their journey, so we don't call them back. But here he's harvesting a Pacific lamprey with a freshwater mussel shell, because the tradition or the practice is that you can't harvest a Pacific lamprey shell or Pacific lamprey with anything other than a freshwater mussel shell, or it's thought that you'll anger the spirits and the waters will rise and will destroy your fish traps. And standing next to Chief is Vice Chair on council, Doug Barrett. And here's another term, which I like to use also, as biocultural restoration, which focuses on restoring relationships between Indigenous peoples and their places, as well as between them and the biodiversity that shaped the language and identities of their ancestors. It's built upon the notion that everything in system is interconnected, as are the problems we perceive and the solutions to them. So it's just a fancy way of saying, we're reconnecting with the land, we're reconnecting those relationships, restoring them, and breaking that colonial mindset that we're above the environment when we've always known that we're part of it. So part of what I do is teach the teachers. So we try to instill in our youth at a very young age resource stewardship. And even though some of our cultural perspectives have changed, as what will happen with colonization and just over time, we try to retain the knowledge of our elders and our cultural practices, because Indigenous knowledge is the first science, and it will help inform, because we've been here for thousands of years and we've seen change. So it'll help going forward and knowing, where we've been, where we are, and where we can go in lieu of climate change. And we do everything with a good heart. Gala Nlue. And so part of instilling resource stewardship, we teach youth and the surrounding community a worldview of reciprocity. And it's, it's not a take relationship, it's a give relationship. We've depended on these systems, and so does everyone else in the community. And we need to give back to that system to ensure that it's gonna be there for the next 7 generations. I probably should have warned you guys in advance. I'm not a very good speaker, and now seeing Chief, I forgot I put him in my slideshow. So hopefully I'm not rambling too much. But here pictured, we have some youth that are out picking berries and making jam with the berries. We have some traditional camps that we dug at a former chief's property. And the first way to relate to youth we found is through food. Like, food is our culture, and so getting them interested in food and all the weird things that they can, like, creep their parents and their friends out with. Reconnecting the youth that way has been very successful. And talking about traditional gardens, we've found that as we're reconnecting, restoring relationships with the land when we're out in the landscape, we'll find like several different culturally significant plants in one place and realize that, oh wait, that's a traditional garden. Because some of these plants like camas and harvest brodia, which is the little purple flower on the upper right, if they're growing like in proximity to each other, along with chocolate lily, that's a traditional garden. One of our ancestors planted those there and stewarded them for a while, and so there's still remnant traditional gardens out there. And then it wouldn't be a TEK talk without referencing some executive orders, secretarial orders, or director's orders, right? So Secretarial Order 3403, which was passed in, I believe, 2021, basically states that the federal government now is required to steward the lands in which they have jurisdiction over in cooperation or in co-stewardship with the tribes to safeguard their interests and their way of life. It's been kind of a struggle. Like I said, that was passed in 2021, but federal agencies are finally starting to come around. I think in Oregon here, or at least my tribe, it's actually been better than most tribes. We started a co-stewardship agreement with the Sayusla National Forest, specifically back in 2016, which I don't know if it was before any of the executive orders came out, but we've been pretty, how do you say, proactive, and a lot of the federal agencies in which we work with have been pretty good about wanting to know like what our priorities are. We've shared our culturally significant plant list. We meet with them annually to go over projects. And so we're actually trying to finalize a gathering MOU that will allow us to issue our own permits to our own membership, and just report back to the Sayusla National Forest on annual gathering numbers and what we're seeing out on the forest, and actually being in a co-management role because we realized that we both lack capacity, and together we think that we'll be able to steward these resources in a way that'll be sustainable for not, just currently, but in lieu of climate change and for the next 7 generations. And pictured here is a picture from my field school. I led a field school. It was just 2-week one. It was a pilot field school. But we took out youth onto one of our tribal forests in partnership with Oregon State University. They received a Seeds of Success grant from the BLM, and they provided much of the resource staff or research staff resources. They paid our youth interns to go out and take measurements on our own tribal forests. We did species diversity assessments, line point intercept, measured the DBH, diameter breast height of trees, just to get some plant statistics. And we're hoping that this next summer we'll be able to extend it out to 8 weeks now that we know what a field school at that length entails. And it was really amazing and a little bit different because while a lot of BLM folks like they do this type of survey from the beginning, like we started out in ceremony, and so we would say a prayer, and we would ask the surrounding environment, after we decided where we wanted to plot, like, hey, is it okay for us to be here? Like, and sometimes it's like a mental conversation, but for the youth's benefit, I spoke it aloud, and I'm like, and I'd ask them, how are you guys feeling? Do you feel like, the environment, the plants are telling you that that's okay for us to, kind of trample around? And they all came back with, no, I feel good about it. And so we'd sprinkle tobacco, that reciprocity piece before we'd start taking our scientific instruments out, start digging holes, and we started digging a hole with a traditional digging stick. And in the evenings after our 8 hours, which was always seemed to be longer than that, we'd come together and eat traditional foods, and we'd do cultural practices like beading, or we'd have storytelling in the evening every night. And it was just a really amazing experience for the youth, I think, and to reconnect them with the land in that way. And then I think this might be my last slide. And so this is the Director's Order number 227. This was specifically for the fish and wildlife. So just recently for our tribe, I forgot to mention that we're a non-treaty tribe. Our treaty was never ratified. And it said that we're one of I think 5 that got stuck up on the cabinet, and our treaties fell behind or something, and they were found years later. But it's probably a good thing that they weren't signed, because in our treaty, we didn't put in that we wanted to retain hunting and fishing rights or visit our usual and accustomed places. And it was probably because we, at that time in 1855, thought that, that wasn't going to be an issue, because we're part of the land's part of us. We never thought that we would have to write that in a treaty to ensure that we were still able to gather and do ceremony, in our places. So this year on June 16th, recognizing Direct Order number 227, that pretty much states that Fish and Wildlife will work with tribes on co-stewardship and co-management of fish, wildlife, and their habitat. And so under this agreement, it allows us to develop our own tribal regulations and to once again hunt, fish, and gather on federal lands, which are composed 50, in Oregon, I don't know how it is everywhere else, but 50% of the state is owned by the federal government in either national forest or BLM ownership. So this will allow us to once again, reconnect with the lands of our inheritance and not be afraid that we're going to be cited or arrested for practicing our ceremony and gathering, our traditional foods and medicines and resources. So part of this agreement is similar to the one that we have with Sayusa National Forest, and it's to meet annually. It'll probably be more quarterly, and all the tribes of Oregon are entering into the same agreement. So it's a pretty historic moment in history right now. And so it is a real co-management agreement. And so part of what we promised is that we would do habitat, fish and wildlife habitat, like surveys and monitoring, as well as fish population surveys and other wildlife population surveys, and coordinate with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, or ODFW, to help steward these resources, because they also acknowledge, like the Sayusa National Forest, that they're over capacity, and to steward these resources in a good way that's sustainable, and that will provide for the next generation. We have to do it together. And I think that's all I had. Hopefully I didn't take up too much time. I think we're probably holding
That was
questions.
great. Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Appreciate it. Before we get to questions, let's see if Latrice, can you hear us? I know your phone is connected.
Yes, I can hear you guys. I'm still out in the field. I didn't get to make it back. We had some work emergency stuff we needed to take care of, so I don't have a PowerPoint or anything.
That's all right. And very much appreciate you figuring out a way just to even get your voice in this discussion. So if you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself and some of the work you're doing, that'd be great. And then we can just open this up for Q&A, and you and Ashley can answer questions.
For sure. So, Oki Nistiu Nitaniku, Aniskamaki is hello, my name is Buffalo Stone Woman. I always say my government name is Latrice Tatsy. I am a member of the Amskapi Piikani Nation, which is the Blackfeet Nation. I reside up on the Blackfeet Nation, which borders Glacier National Park and Canada. I was working for Piikani Lodge Health Institute as our cultural land ecologist, and I'm kind of transferring in between a different job right now. But within that position, what we were able to do is work with producers on regenerative grazing practices. And what that was is this changing the way the animals were utilizing the land to go from continuous grazing to more of a rest rotation grazing. And how we brought that back is looking at how bison used to utilize the landscape and how our ancestors understood their grazing patterns. And so what we would do and utilize that information and take interns out to the field and utilize those practices with them. And so what we found is by offering internships for students, that we were able to engage them out on the land and get them back in there to see if they to give them the opportunity for that land-based learning. Because what we started to realize is when we're trying to get youth out there, their relationship has really been disconnected. And so one of the things is when we realize, how are we going to create change? And that change always starts with our youth, because when we make decisions, when we're managing the land today, we're not doing it for our generation, we're doing it for the next generations to come. Because you don't plant a tree for yourself for it to bear the fruit. You understand that when you plant this tree, that the fruit is going to bear for the people that are going to come after you. So a lot of these practices that I loved when Ashley was talking about the reciprocity. So, when we go out, I loved how she was saying you take tobacco. So when we bring our interns out to the field to do anything, what we're doing is we're taking them out, they're making that offering with the tobacco. And so you're not just taking from the land without honoring it And so you have those relationships and when you're doing those type of practices. And so that was the concept in which we were utilizing when we were going out and doing the work, is understanding that the practices and everything that was happening was for the generations to come. You don't manage the land for yourself because the changes aren't going to happen like that. So you always think about it as generations down the road. And so with a lot of those grazing practices, it was to graze for carbon storage and things like that. Because if you think about it, historically, the grasslands were plowed, were taking apart those natural carbon sinks that they had, they were taking apart. And so trying to keep those grasslands intact while improving your grazing has been a big part of it, but it's also that cultural understanding of having that and how you utilize those practices. And so that was a lot of it, implementing different practices from the Blackfeet Climate Adaptation Plan, the cultural sector, looking at the agriculture sector and the water sector, and implementing snow fences, implementing beaver dam analogs, but understanding those practices that you're implementing come from your cultural background. And so when they were talking about those different ways of science, the tradition, the TEK, the cultural science, the other term that has been used is that I like to use is a cultural science, because the way that you are going to practice science is also based on your cultural understanding and your cultural background. And that was a really important rule of thumb in when you're doing or thinking of that.
Latrice, you're breaking up a little now. Is that happening to anyone else? Yeah, okay.
To it. How
Oh,
are they going to continually do this? And so when we put the land stewardship responsibility back on them to say, like, look, this was culturally what we did. There was ways our people understood the elk, the deer.
Oh, no, I think she
oh,
dropped completely.
yeah, the call dropped. It wasn't a bandwidth. I think it's her phone connection. She's calling in from out in the field. Um, so while we wait to get Latrice back,
I think
I
she's
can
back.
see. Oh, she's back. All right,
Yeah. Can you hear me?
we can. It was starting to break up a little. Can you?
Okay. I was just talking about the responsibilities tied to the practice and how it comes to your the culture. And so with us, when I talk about those cultural sciences, it's all land-based, that land-based responsibility. So when we're going out with producers and we're talking, it's also putting in that natural stewardship of that responsibility, and you're caring for something that is going to provide for generations to come after you. And so that's really what it's about, is putting that cultural responsibility back within ourselves, and understanding like, hey, we do have this responsibility to take from this land. We can't continually extract and extract and extract, because we're not going to see the benefits of the land, because the land isn't going to be able to heal. And so that's with it, is understanding those balances and those relationships when you're working with producers, and understanding what your goals are. But it really goes back to who you are as a person culturally and what your values are tied to. And so that was with a lot of the
Oh, so close. We were doing great. Um, I guess we'll give her. There she is again.
I know.
You're really quick about jumping
I
back
guess
on.
that's primarily. I know. So I mean, primarily it's just relationship based knowledge, and then not being extractive and making those getting your youth out there, because your youth are the one who are it's about putting that responsibility back within the land or with the people, but also caring for the land for generations to come.
All right, thank you, Latrice.
You're welcome.
And I have I see Bellamy has a question. I have a question for both of you. I'm gonna pull rank here. Sorry, Bellamy, but then we'll then get to your question, I promise. Just about if you could give our group sort of a specific example of ways that indigenous knowledge or cultural knowledge is being used currently by like Ashley, your department, or Latrice, your grazing operations. Like what does some of that look like, how it informs those decisions on the kinds of stewardship projects you're working on?
I'll go first before I move a little bit. So the cultural based practices is I'll take the students out to the field. We will go look for teepee rings before we do any type of snow fence installation. And so the snow fence installation is just to trap snow, because what we've been dealing with is I've been dealing with a lot of drought. So we have the diameter of the TP rings. And so what we do is we look at where the rocks carrions were piled the longest. And so what ends up being of the wind direction. And so what we do with those models is we take those back into the room and this is what we're seeing. So let's based on our years, what are the direction
Okay, that's it's so close to working, but not quite. All right, Ashley, why don't you jump in here and we'll.
Okay, now I'm back.
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I was saying is when we're dealing with the droughts and those factors, what we're able to do is bring our youth back to the land and show them how our people understood it, and to implement practices today that will benefit our producers. And so even going far back as beaver dam analogs and understanding beaver cannot be everywhere where they were, but if we do the models of the dams in areas where they're no longer at, putting those same effects in that they have where the streams are running dry at the end of July, August, and holding water in those areas longer. And we're starting to see those benefits by going back to those practices and relearning our people. What we said is our people learned from the animals. The animals took pity on us. They showed us how to live on the land, and they gave us that information. And so for us, I'm always like, we're relearning these ways. We're relearning them from the animals. We're having to do these installations and these things that mimic these what I call them, these keystone species. We're mimicking these keystone species behavior when we're doing regenerative grazing. We're working with producers who are working with cows, but we're trying to mimic historical bison grazing in these areas where they grazed them down, but they also gave them long periods of rest. A lot along with the beavers, we're trying to put those practices back in to these watersheds to where they would have this activity. And so it's that cultural, what we call that cultural responsibility, and putting that back on ourselves, where we have to have those ecological relationships. That is a part of who we are as Indigenous people. And we're all Indigenous somewhere. There's a medicine wheel, and there's red, there's black, there's yellow, and there's white. And understanding that medicine wheel also encompasses the humans, the humanity that we people are putting on this earth. And when we talk about conservation, a lot of the times they're like, well, take people out, you can't have people there, people are affecting it. And it's like, well, no, people are a part of the land. Why do you think people are having so many?
That was she was on a roll, but I'm not even gonna try Ashley because I bet she if she doesn't jump back on in like 5 seconds. Well, I thought she had a good connection there. That seemed to be.
Because they um, so putting them relationship we're relationship people, and so when we go and bring back the identity of who they are as people, try
So,
to
Lat-
keep
Latrice, can you hear me? I'm going to oh, she's gone. All right. So yeah, I would also like to know that, Chris. Well, if we get a better connection with Latrice, we'll ask about the TP rings. So Ashley, maybe you can just quick explain some of those projects you're working on and how you're bringing your tribe's knowledge to those projects, and then we'll get to Q&A.
Sure. Yeah. So, we're working on a current project with the South Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve, which was the oldest national estuarine research reserve in the NER system. And they're doing a restoration project. It's a stage 0. It's on a valley floor. There used to be a lot of tribal families that lived up there that homesteaded after the Homestead Act. And the river was pushed back up against the mountain. It used to have runs of coho that come straight from the ocean and Pacific lamprey. And, because of land use, past land use practices and, pushing the stream up against the mountain and planting grasses that aren't native, it's really affected the landscape. And so what's her title? Dr. Alice Yates. I think she's the stewardship coordinator there. She came to us, as in like me and John Schaefer, who's he's retired now, but he was our biologist. And she first created a relationship. It wasn't like, hey, I've started at South Slough, but like, hey, do you guys want to like go out and like, pick some berries? Like she actually like researched us and like knew what we liked. And so we started building a relationship that way. And then it turned into like, hey, I'm finally, getting people at the reserve wanting to work with the tribe now. And I got this restoration project that I've been thinking about doing. What do you guys think? And so from its inception, we were included in the grant proposal. We were included on like what plant species we think should be planted in this restoration project. We've also went out to the site and like Latrice was saying about the teepee rings, we made sure that, which we don't have teepees here, we have plank houses because we stayed in one place. We had fish camps upriver, but we didn't have to move around, so we had big plank houses or lodges. So we made sure that there weren't any cultural resources because the place in which the restoration project was occurring, any place that there's water, there's salmon, there were people, and so the likelihood of cultural resources being there is very high because a good place to live is a good place to live, right? So yeah, so from its inception, we did cultural resource monitoring, and we will be doing cultural resource monitoring as so there'll be some heavy equipment that'll be going out there and scraping because we have some reed canary grass that is like really hard to get rid of. We're encouraging more cultural burning. So in places that we didn't think there was a high probability of cultural resources and that would benefit the most from heavy equipment and scraping, which won't be very much just to get the reed canary grass roots. We'll be there monitoring to make sure that our cultural resources aren't damaged, because once they're gone, they're gone. And we'll be there every step of the way. And as part of doing some site assessments, we had a intern come from Hawaii that identified places. So we identified some culturally significant plants that weren't currently there, but that probably were there in the past and could be there again, which was beaked hazel, beargrass, and giant chain fern. And those are all really important basketry materials that are hard to come by. So the intern, she did some like mapping and some really cool stuff in GIS that I wish I could do, and did surveyed the soil and determined some places where in coordination with what we were describing to her as like the conditions they favor and the types of soils. And so all of that was our own indigenous knowledge of how like we've found these plants within our traditional lands, and we've also propagated them on the property for other restoration projects. So we're pretty familiar with their life stages and what they like. And then based on what we've been taught from elders and our own oral histories, all that indigenous knowledge was then conveyed to the intern, and she was able to find places in which to place these plants that we think will be the where they'll be most successful. So that's probably the best example, I think, of using indigenous knowledge as far as like what we've done. We're hoping, with working with Fish and Wildlife and Slate's National Forest, that we could further develop that and build upon that capacity. But yeah, that's what I got.
All right, cool. Okay, so question time. You know how this works, journalists, and Bellamy had a question for you, I believe.
Yeah, Ashley, I'm in the greater Seattle area, and I'm just like wanting to jump into the car and drive to where you are, because there's so much of what you're doing that really, really interests me. My question is about cultural appropriation and misappropriation. I kind of live in fear of that, but at the same time, I'm like hearing you describe plants and combinations of plants that, it just sounds so amazing. Like, would it be okay for me if someone gave me some bulbs to plant those things in my own garden? Or, where is the line, I guess, in terms of not wanting to take knowledge, but also wanting to spread important practices that, might be a solution for everyone? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, and I appreciate your sensitivity. Not a whole lot of people realize what cultural appropriation is or misappropriation, but I think what you're talking about is amazing, and I wish more people would be willing to do that. And so we have a native nursery here. Part of our program is to offer, culturally significant plants, which are native plants, because we all know that native plants are the best plants for the place in which we live. But yeah, it's for people like you that want to return the native plants, to their native habitat. Because a lot of our culturally significant plants have disappeared, or they've been extirpated for for farming and gardening and ranching purposes, to make way for monocultures. And so I commend you for what you're wanting to do and trying to do. And I don't think that's cultural appropriation or misappropriation at all. And, I know every tribal nation's different and how their cultures are different, their traditions are different, their practices are different. But I could say with 95% certainty that there isn't going to be a tribal member that is going to tell you, no, you can't plant those. It's better than planting Procosmia or whatever else they're planting these days. Some weird ornamental. But no, thank you for your question.
Thanks for your answer.
Thanks, Ashley. Latrice, if you are still here, because I just see you left a note, someone did ask if you could clarify the connection between teepee rings and snow fences, wind and drought.
Okay, can you guys hear me better now?
I can hear you, and we'll hope it lasts, because sometimes it sounds great and then it just abruptly drops.
So with the snow fences, what we do is we measure the diameter of the teepee rings. And what we do with that information is we take it back to the classroom and we build or we design snow fence models that we put out on producers' properties who are dealing with drought. And so we'll put them by the reservoirs or just anywhere where they're needing snow trapped by fences. So that's how we utilize those, and those are the correlation with the snow fence and teepee rings, if that makes sense.
All right, thanks, Latrice. We made it through the answer, and you stayed with us. So we're gonna keep rolling the
good.
dice. Luann, you had a question for both presenters, and maybe Latrice will let you go first on answering it.
Yeah, thanks both of you all. My question kind of connects a couple things that both of you said. Ashley was mentioning the origin stories of her tribe, and Latrice had mentioned some of the ways that Blackfeet Nation, her tribe, are mimicking keystone animal species functions in order to respond to drought. But I was wondering, as different tribes respond to different, climate related extreme weather in their parts of the country, how not only like maybe like specific practices are being utilized to respond to those challenges, but how are like the stories and kind of like the greater cosmologies that the tribes are living within being called upon to respond to those challenges? Like, are you all able to like draw from like stories and wisdom of elders as you think about climate change and all of these different really disastrous events happening?
Oh, did Latrice drop off? Oh, there she is. I don't know if she heard the question.
Yeah, Latrice, were you able to hear the question?
I wasn't able, can she type it?
Yeah, so yeah, Luann, why don't you type it, and then Ashley, you can go.
Sure. So yeah, that's a great question. And actually, so in my own backyard is the Elliott State Research Forest, which Oregon State University was going to take on management for the state of Oregon. And through our their research, they found that the fire histories were a lot more frequent than what was first believed by scientists, which we've been telling them, for years. And it's even in our oral stories and our histories and what elders have been telling us, and even ethnographic notes, written by white men, that we burned periodically to manage, for resource and forest health. And now Western sciences finally, they're doing dendrochronology work, so they're taking tree rings and they're discovering, they're looking for the fire scars, and they're realizing that our oral histories are aligning with what the tree rings are telling us, was that we burned, periodically. Elders say that we burned like every year just to keep up, the grasses that the elk like and the other animals. And because where I live, or what it used to look like, was what was called like a prairie. And so we had like these mosaic forest types where you had like, maybe a cluster of Western red cedars over here, and then you'd have, some maybe big maples, and you just had a lot of trees, in pockets and spread all over the landscape, but it was pretty open, for the plants and animal species, because a lot of our culturally significant plants, they like that dappled light. They like a lot. They like a lot of light, but then they also like some of the protection of the taller trees. And So yeah, that type of work is showing that our oral histories are correct. Like I said, our indigenous knowledge was the first science, and so it feels really I feel really venerated in that Western science is finally realizing that there's truth in some of those oral histories, and then that they can help inform management going forward. Like that's probably not the only example. I'm sure Latrice probably has some also.
Yeah, Latrice, do you want to chime in? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. Oh, there's no. Okay, we're gonna go down to Sporthy. And you all maybe just emailing Latrice a lot of questions. So.
Thanks to both of you for sharing the work that your tribes are doing. I was just curious to know how many projects do you currently have that really ties with food sovereignty and food security in your tribes. So I understand Latrice is working with cattle producers. So I was just curious what examples she might have. And Ashley, you mentioned about coho salmon, but I was just curious if you have specific projects right now that tie to food security and food sovereignty in your tribe.
Did Latrice? Oh, there she went again.
Yeah, it's
so we're actually building on food security and food sovereignty. We have a community garden, which we plant not only, what you call traditional foods, as in, broccoli and potatoes and stuff like that, everything that you find at the grocery store, but also culturally significant plants as well, like Wapato. We have a pond on our reservation where we grow Wapato, which is kind of like a form of is similar to potato. And then a lot of the tuberous bulbs like chocolate lily and camas and harvest brodia. And we also have tried to which it's been very popular, is like grow your own, or in people's own yards. So we have delivered raised beds to elders that are like they're taller than most typical raised beds, so they require a lot more soil, but we gave them garden seeds, and then also some culturally significant plant seeds, so they can have access, in their backyard to food. And it was especially important during COVID because, in our community, we have a lot of elders, and they were very susceptible. And so to be able to do that for them, it gave them like a sense of purpose, because everyone had to stay at home. But then also, getting there, you're kind of reconnecting with the land in the way, like, I mean, putting your fingers in dirt, there's been lots of studies on how that helps mental health. So that's been a great project. We're trying to repurpose one of our properties to do a bigger food sovereignty project, where we can plant different areas with different culturally significant species. But it may be now that because what I didn't mention before is our tribal land tracts, we didn't reacquire them until 2019. The president signed the order in 2018, but we didn't get the lands until 2019. And so with that, reconnecting and rebuilding that relationship with those forest lands, we'll likely start trying to grow traditional gardens again, and return the stewardship, hopefully return cultural burning, which has in lieu of climate change, we're trying to influence policymakers to realize that the term wilderness is in fact not what is the term of, it's not what was here prior to colonization. It was a result of removal and all the diseases that swept through, like about 200 years before colonists made their way over to the West Coast. And so what had appeared in the form of wilderness was actually just the removal of stewardship because of the hardships and the death toll from diseases. But I feel like I'm spiraling here. But what I wanted to say was that we're cultural burning is what we feel will help remove climate change. And I know that kind of probably doesn't make sense to a lot of people. Oh, you want to, put a bunch of carbon in the atmosphere, but it's a proactive measure, and it's what needs to be returned, because those landscapes, they have co-evolved with humans for millennia, and cultural burning was one of the tools we used. And because that has been removed because of that relationship, and that's why we have all these mega fires in the Pacific Northwest. But I'll end my policy pitch.
Well, I'm doing it to you again, Bellamy, but building off that, Ashley, when we talked earlier before this workshop, you mentioned some of the challenges or considerations of co-stewardship with the state, and how your tribe is getting some of these lands back. The vast majority are state lands that or public lands that are being managed with different entities. And how do you navigate the differences of opinion or the different uses that people see for this land? You talked some about the sport fishery concerns not necessarily aligning with the return of native species concerns or things like that. Could you just explain a little to people how that works, and what kind of recourse the tribe has if they think something's not being managed the way it should?
Yeah, so I don't know how I'm gonna be able to answer that question, because our co-management agreements are pretty new. I think the Coquel tribe, which is our southern sister, they have entered into this agreement just a couple months before the rest of us have, the other tribes. But yeah, it's been there. I'm sure there will be difficulties because the federal government has this responsibility, this treaty responsibility, and now it's in executive order or secretarial order, and so they have this responsibility to the tribes first, but then they also have to balance, like you were mentioning, the other values that the public have, because they're managing it for the public as well. And so one of the challenges that I foresee, which I don't know how we're going to solve this, is that the challenge of bass and non-native species like perch and crappie, I think, or bluegill. I think those are two common names for them. But so they're freshwater species, but they're not native to our lakes and rivers, and they have decimated a lot of the native fish here, especially the salmon, bass, and Pacific lamprey. Bass just eat everything. But because bass are really big sports fish, there are people that come from all over the world to 10 Mile Lakes, which is just north of North Bend. And it used to be traditionally one of the largest canneries, salmon canneries, up and down, I think second to Columbia probably. And it was just this little lake. But so that tells you how much salmon were there. But so now there's freshwater bass in there that have replaced the salmon, and the issue that the tribes has is that, well, on one river, and on the Coquille River, you allow bass to be there's no limit on bass, and they want them out of that river system. But here on this lake, like, you have a limit on how many bass you can take, and then you have a limit like on the length. And so we're like, but they're not even native to that lake, and they're like eating all of, like, they're eating, because we're like the salmon people, like probably Latrice, like she, bison is, they're bison people, and we're salmon people. And So it's really frustrating from you know, a tribal perspective and a management perspective when you have like this really invasive fish that is displacing all these other native species. And so it gets sticky because it's I mean, coho are valued, but bass are also valued, and it's like you can't really have both. And so of course, you know, being salmon people were like vouching for the salmon. So ODFW will probably have to make a decision soon on how they're going to navigate that. It'll be interesting to see. I don't envy them at all. But we're pushing towards policy that will allow us to not have limits on bass. I mean, they are good eating. I won't deny that, but I hope that answered your question, Evan.
Yeah, that was a great example. That just gives people a concrete example of what we're talking about here. Bellamy, you had a question.
Let me see if I can remember it. First, Ashley, I just want to say you're really a good public speaker, so you don't need to, well, maybe you like pretending that you aren't, but I just want to say you're coming across really well, and I appreciate that a lot. I wanted to ask about, I think you mentioned that your tribe is about to become recognized federally, and that seems like a really amazing thing. And I know it's a big topic, but I'm wondering to what extent do you think it's only a story to be told like from the perspective of your tribe and its journey, or are there lessons that can be learned that apply to other tribes? And I'm thinking specifically because it's the one that's right in my front yard, if you will, where we live and work, the Duwamish people not being a recognized treaty tribe, and there's a lot of concern, you know, from certain circles about their relationship with the Muckleshoot, which is recognized. And I understand you may not be able to speak for those tribes, but I'm just curious what you can share.
So I think I may have confused you, and I apologize. So my tribe is federally recognized, but our treaty wasn't signed. So I mean that puts us in a little bit like in between the Muckleshoot and the, what'd you say, the Duwamish people?
Duwamish. It's the river that runs right through Seattle.
Yeah, it's different for every tribe. I know that the Chinook Nation, you know, that straddles the southern end of Washington and Oregon, they have been fighting for years to be recognized, and they were never removed. Like their culture has remained intact. You know, they have their language in it. I don't know if I have any suggestions. I mean, we've also had a couple years ago, the federal government de-recognized the tribe, and so like it's very it's a very difficult situation. It's very sad. But so I guess the pros and cons of not being recognized there, I met the chief of what is it, the Ahoma Nation in New Orleans in December, and their tribe is not federally recognized, but it's state recognized. And in order to become federally recognized, the federal government is demanding that they have blood quantum, and they're saying no. And my tribe is also not, we're not a blood quantum tribe. And, you know, there's disagreements about, you know, why there should be and why there shouldn't be, but, you know, it feels like a pedigree situation, like you're, it comes down to eugenics, which, oh, that's a whole nother can of worms. But, I guess my advice to them would just, I mean, you do benefit from being federally recognized because you have appropriated funds and you have more, you have a seat at the table, and you know, people are more, at least agencies are more willing to work with you, which that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't matter if you're federally recognized or not. But I would also encourage them to not, you know, to fight for what they believe. And if they don't want to have a blood quantum, then they absolutely don't have to, because there's other tribes in the nation that do not.
Thanks, Ashley. Did anyone else have a question? My chat has run dry. And Ashley, the idea going into this was not to make you do it all yourself. So your efforts are very much appreciated. And I just want to thank you for your time. And I'm stalling right now to see if another question comes through, because you never know with journalists. I'm sure they'll think of some soon. But I did have one last question for you, because you did mention something about a lot of your work with youth. And I'm just curious if this is something you see, like what your experience was of growing up with this. Are you seeing more interest in cultural knowledge and indigenous knowledge, just even from within the youth of the tribe? Is it something where people are reconnecting, or is it something where it's been there all along and now just other agencies or other outside sources are paying attention?
Well, for my children's generation, it's been there this whole time. Like they're pretty lucky, and you know, that my generation was able to be taught by their elders, because they were finally comfortable with, like, you know, the Indigenous Religions Freedom Act of, was it 1976, 1970, somewhere in there. They were finally you know, becoming more comfortable with returning to their culture and their practices and their ceremonies. And so, you know, when I was born, we were finally, you know, be able to practice those once again. But, you know, we were still just trying to discover ourselves, because we were divorced from our culture for so long. But yeah, my kids in this generation of youth, you know, a lot of them, it's, you know, second nature to them, which it should be. It is difficult competing with technology, though. I won't lie. But and I'm not sure as far as when agencies and others wanted to started acknowledging that indigenous knowledge was actually the first science, and that they valued our input. But I'm not going to complain. There's really been an uptick in the last 5 years, I would say. And it's been a really amazing journey. I've got to go to a lot of places and meet a lot of different people and other tribal nations, and see what they're doing, and compare notes, and I hope it continues, because we all need to come together to co-manage or co-steward. I don't like to say manage, but I get stuck in that, because that's what the word that's recognized by the federal government is, co-manage, but it's steward, because we're part of the ecosystem. But it's gonna take all of us. So I'm looking forward to what the future holds.
All right. Well, I think we'll let you go with one last question. I'm sorry, Sporthy, to jump this. I'm gonna give Ashley an easy one. How do you prepare lamprey, and do your kids like them? Is what Bellamy wants to know.
So to prepare lamprey, like I said, you take a soft mussel shell, and because they don't have bones, but they have a notochord. So you on I guess the dorsal side, you would like cut them down, and you'd pull out the notochord, and then you'd like fillet them out. And some people like pound them, and they put them on a steak and smoke them slowly with a traditional fire, like we do salmon. I mean, that's how you traditionally would do it, or you'd put it in an earthen oven wrapped in like skunk cabbage leaves and stuff. But it's an acquired taste. They are like they have 8 times more calories than salmon, which they're pretty oily. So imagine how much oily Pacific lamprey are. Oh, thanks for sharing a story. I'm gonna have to click on that later. But my children have never eaten them, and it's because their populations are so low that the only way we're able to harvest them is when we do surveys with ODFW.
Oh man.
And by that time they're already spawned out. And so if you can imagine, it's like eating out like a spawned out salmon. which I've done before. I do not recommend, but so, I mean, that's part of one of our goals as a tribe is to, you know, help with the stewardship of the land, you know, not just for salmon, you know, because we're pretty salmon centric because salmon's a keystone species, but so are lamprey. And, you know, when we steward the lands, it's holistically. So we're hoping that with the work that we're doing and working with other agencies, that we'll be able to bring their numbers up so that we can introduce it back into our diet and that my kids can actually try what they're supposed to taste like.
All right. Well, thanks again. Everyone, let's give Ashley a round of applause. You hung in there. We really do appreciate this. And yeah, we can't do what we do without people like you offering up their time and expertise, and it is very much